All right, we are live, guys. Let's start off with the very first question. Let me just start screen sharing. And I hope आप लोग ने पहला question देख लिया होगा. If not, so don't worry, we're gonna do it together. So here's the very first question, which is related to your concepts of storage devices. So we need to basically define and tell what that specific device is, and followed by that, screen sharing होगी. नहीं हुई एक second. Okay, okay. Can you guys see the screen clearly? Yeah. Guys, can any one of you confirm? Is the screen clearly visible? Yes or no? Okay, okay, okay. So let's start off with the very first part. The question basically says, Zilkanan, you can just see and analyze whether your answer is the right one or not. सही है? क्योंकि इसके अंदर explanation भी मैं साथ साथ करूँगा, तो इस वजह से it's sort of something जो कि हम I would like solve it on my own. So from the very first question, there are five storage devices which are described in the table below. In the column 2, we need to name them, and in the 3, 4, 5 columns, we need to basically show what type of storage device are we talking about. So the very first one is basically talking about an optical media, which is basically making use of one spiral track alongside red lasers. And like red lasers are used to read it and to write data on it, and it makes use of dual layering technology. So remember, whenever we hear the word dual layering, that's a pretty good hint that it's talking about DVD. See, so your DVD is basically sort of, you can assume that we have one CD and then we have another CD, and when you combine the two CDs together into one single disc, it's something known as DVD. That's like the super most basic concept understanding of what a DVD is. So the answer to the very first part is basically a DVD. And now we need to basically tell whether it's primary, secondary, and or offline. So your primary usually constitutes of RAM ROM, secondary includes your hard disk SSDs, and offline basically includes stuff like your DVD, CDs, DVD RAM, SD card, Blu-ray disc, all those stuff. So it's gonna go like offline. Then the second one is like, okay, we have a non-volatile memory chip. Contents of this chip cannot be altered. It is often used to store the startup routines of the BIOS. So we did discuss this yesterday, yesterday also. So this is basically talking about ROM, read on the memory, and this is basically a part of your secondary memory. अभी ऐसी चीजें आपको याद होनी चाहिए. What do we mean by non-volatile? This should be a question. Non-volatile basically means whenever you hear the word non-volatile in your computer science syllabus or exam anyway, it should basically it should be clear that we are referring to. No, it basically means that it is something that cannot be deleted. So non-volatile memory chip means that the data is permanently stored. It's not something which is there for the time being, or just like Zulkarnain said, that it's not there for temporary purposes. So you have a memory chip which stores the data permanently. When we say that a RAM is a volatile memory chip, we basically mean that it is storing data temporarily. So the moment you turn off your electricity supply, you're just going to lose all the data which was stored in it originally. And that's something we don't want, right? So now the answer to this part is ROM, with secondary being the category. Continuing, we have the third one stating clearly optical media. So ये तो हमें पता लग गया optical media की बात हो रही है. Okay, ये तो offline होनी है. And then it says that it makes use of concentric tracks to store the data. And this allows read and write operations to be carried out at the same time. So when we have a scenario like this, we are basically talking about DVD, but it's an extension of DVD, and we call such DVD as DVD RAM. See? So it's your DVD RAM. And the answer to this one is again offline. So आप offline के साथ जाते हैं and you'll be good to go. फिर उसके बाद आपके पास आ रहा है कि okay, क्या नाम है, the fourth one is like non-volatile memory devices, which basically make use of NAND flash memories, which consists of millions of transistor wires in series of single circuit boards. अब इसके अंदर समझने की बात ये है कि आपको NAND जो है ना, NAND are basically used at two places. It's used there in your RAM, and then it is also made use in your USB storage devices. सही है. So आप यहाँ पे दो आंसर्स लिख सकते हैं. You could either write SSD, and फिर आपकी category is going to become secondary storage, because SSD भी non-volatile. It's not something which sort of like deletes the data the moment you turn it off. And then you can also mention it as SD card or XD card. It's up to you. ROM किधर मैंने उल्टा लिख दिया. Oh yes, my bad. Yes, yes. Thanks for the correction, man. It's primary. It's primary. बिल्कुल, it's primary. Thank you, Zilkanan. So now continuing. So हम यहाँ पे SSD भी लिख सकते हैं, or we can go with SD card. So now if you go with SSD, so we need to divide it. Like for the timing, वहाँ पे आपने इनमें से कोई एक लिख देना है. So if you go with SSD, it's basically your secondary one. If you go with SD card, it's basically your offline one. And that is the correct answer. आप किसी के साथ भी जा सकते हैं. The final one says that it's like an optical media which uses blue laser. So blue laser is a great hint towards how we are just referring to Blu-ray. So हम यहाँ पे कर देंगे Blu-ray. Oh, and by the way, it's Blu-ray. It's not BLUE. And this the explanation behind this has been stated in the book कि वो copyright issue की वजह से या बल्कि नहीं blue हाँ it's done like this. Let me confirm it too. It's Blu-ray, right? Blu-ray, yeah. So Blu-ray. लेकिन इसको आप Blu-ray भी कर सकते हैं और अगर आप एग्जाम में करना चाहते हैं तो I don't think so इतना मसला होगा. You can also write it like this. But the official movies and all that stuff, the discs, it's usually written like BLURAY discs. तो आप इंटरनेट के ऊपर भी सर्च कर ले आपको ब्लू रे डिस्क इस तरह मिलेंगे बिकॉज उसके पीछे रीजनिंग ये थी कि अगर इफ यू मेक यूज ऑफ द वर्ड ब्लू इट कैन बी कॉपीराइटेड लेटर ऑन सो इट्स जस्ट लाइक ताकि कोई कॉपीराइट ना हो सो दे नेम्ड इट लाइक BLU ब्लू सही ब्लू रे या एग्जैक्टली सो ब्लू रे इज अगेन वन सॉर्ट ऑफ एन ऑप्टिकल primary storage. And this question is pretty good because it sort of tests all the possible storage devices alongside the categories. So you should be aware of what is a primary one, what type of devices come under that, what's secondary, what type of devices come under that, what's offline, what devices come under that, what are the features of them. So like you should be aware of the description too. And you should also be aware of the benefits you get for making use of some devices. So for instance, you can have a question. I hope we do get one in the coming question list, but there is a possibility you get a question on like why should one go for SRAM rather than DRAM. So you should be aware of the relevant advantages and disadvantages of making use of a specific RAM type. Oh, the good one. So we do have a RAM question up here, so which says that Robert has a mobile device that uses RAM, ROM, and an SSD. And so we need to basically explain what RAM, ROM, and SSD are used for. So you won't be getting marks by just explaining it. You need to basically explain it in a way कि आपने बताना कि वो use किस purpose के लिए हो रहा है. So we need to explain what is RAM used for, what is ROM used for, what is SSD used for. So RAM is basically used to store the instructions that are currently being in use, या currently being executed. तो हम ये कर लेंगे to store the instructions that are currently being executed. Because whatever is being executed, that specific instruction is taken into RAM and then that's being executed and then your RAM removes that part and then the next instruction is basically fetched into RAM. That is how RAM works. Then ROM को तो हमने इतनी दफा देख लिया. ROM is basically your non-volatile memory which stores boot up instructions or the BIOS. So हम ये कर सकते हैं to store boot up instructions or BIOS कर लो. See? And then the last one says SSD. So SSD आप क्यों computers में डालते हैं? So that you can store files and software. See? To store files and softwares. So you see that the question again does not ask you to explain it, but rather it is asking you to explain the relevant application of it. जो कि अब आप लोग शायद यहाँ पे कोई लिख रहे हो RAM stands for random access memory and stuff like that, you won't be getting marks for that. समझो? So you should be going with the exact purpose. So it's really important कि आप question को पढ़ें and you understand. क्योंकि अगर मैं शुरू में इसको पहली नजर में देख रहा था ना तो what I felt was that we are basically talking about what RAM. We need to basically define what's RAM, ROM, and SSD. But आखिर में मैंने देखा कि okay, it's saying used for. So it's really important आप पूरे question को अच्छे से पढ़ें. Then part B is talking about why we should go for SSD rather than an HDD. And also, you see they stated the word is used in mobile devices. This means that one benefit can also be related to something which discusses why SSD is more better to be used in a mobile device rather than in a hard disk. So the biggest reason why SSD is better is because of the way it is like it uses less energy, and the way it is more compact, lightweight, or you can say also more portable. तो there are lots of reasons which you can mention जो कि आप लोगों ने याद किए होंगे, but यहाँ पे हम एक ये कर लेते कि it has a faster read write speed. ये पेन चेंज कर देता हूँ. It has a faster read write speed, so improves and thus improves performance, एक point. And then the second reason goes like आपने कोई भी बता सकते हो, but because they stated the word is used in a mobile device, so I should go with something which is related to why mobile device के अंदर if you're making use of an SSD, it's a better reason because it's way more compact, it's portable, right? So it is more compact and lightweight. क्योंकि आप ऐसे फोन तो नहीं चाहते ना जिसका वेट बहुत ज्यादा हो. You definitely need one which is there in your hands comfortably. तो अगर मैं किस तरह फोन लूं जिसको मैंने फिर उठाना भी पड़ेगा और ये तो बहुत ज्यादा वो होगा, तो आई डोंट वांट दिस. सी सो टू इंश्योर दैट आप अपने फोन्स के अंदर SSD यूज करें. एंड बाय द वे यू शुड बी अवेयर यूजुअली ऑल दीज फोन्स डू कम विद SSD, बिकॉज अगर आपके पास कोई हार्ड डिस्क का लैपटॉप एंड यू स्लाइड ऑफ लीव इट लाइक यू रेज इट अ बिट एंड देन यू ड्रॉप इट एंड वो इस तरह जमीन से टस लगे, तो उसमें एक मसला ही आपके साथ हो सकता है दैट समटाइम्स द हार्ड डिस्क फ्रेगमेंट्स just messes up, say, and then it no longer works, so you need to replace the hard disk. But that does not work with SSD. Even if you like throw a SSD from up here and it's going to touch the ground, it's not going to damage its internal circuitry. And that's the same reason why, which proves that your phones also have an SSD, because आप phone को ऊपर से छोड़ो टूट सकता है, but in most cases अगर आपकी यहाँ टेबल से गिर जाए, it's समथिंग जो कि बच जाता है. सो क्योंकि बच जाता है, इट्स ऑल्सो अ क्लियर रीजन कि इतना मसला नहीं होना चाहिए इंशाल्लाह. सो नाउ कंटिन्यूइंग टू द थर्ड क्वेश्चन. Nadia uses several types of computer storage for her homework and other projects. Okay, 5 examples of the computer storage are given. We just need to take whether each one is primary, secondary, or offline. SSD is the secondary one. Say Blu-ray disc offline, USB offline, RAM primary, read-only memory ROM primary. ये आपको पता होना चाहिए. Then second part says कि this is like a pretty comprehensive question which is basically asking you to explain how does a magnetic storage device store data. अब इसके अंदर ये कि you should be generally aware of how this happens. अब ज्यादा इसके ऊपर questions अभी नहीं टेस्ट होंगे, but you should be aware कि यार इनपुट आउटपुट डिवाइसेस में आपसे वर्किंग का नहीं पूछेंगे. सही है. पहले ये क्वेश्चन आता था कि okay, of course. So initially there used to be questions which stated that you should explain how does a specific input output device work. So maybe like how does a mouse work, how does a keyboard work, no worries, how does maybe the monitor works. And so you had to explain the whole logic behind what we are trying to do and why. Why do we need both RAM and secondary storage, both store data? And I'll get back to your question after this. But now, post 2023, the examiner clearly stated in the syllabus that you should not learn how does a specific input output device work. But that does not mean that it's something applied to memory storage devices too. So while preparing, do know that you should be aware of what makes a magnetic storage device a magnetic storage device, so like the way it works. And you should also be aware of how does a solid state device work, say, so like those SSDs. So now coming to this question, describe how does a magnetic storage device stores data. So the first point is the one which we also stated yesterday, that your storage device has platters, and those platters are divided into tracks. Based on that, the disk is then spun, and you have sort of like a header which can you can say that moves across the whole media, and it reads and writes data using electromagnets. So I guess we did a question like this yesterday too, but let's write it again. Stores data on platters that are divided into tracks and sectors. These are 2 points. So when you write it till this point, you're going to get 2 out of 4. Say, no, 2 out of 4. I guess this should be a 6-mark question. So you should get like 2 out of 6. This means you need to write 4 more points. Then you have to talk about how the disk is spun, and it has like a read-write arm that moves across so that it can read data using electromagnets. So we're going to say the disk is spun. The disk is spun and and a read write arm is used so that the data could be read, could be read or wrote onto the surface. Electromagnets are used for magnets are used for this process. For this process. Now you have stated like 4 5 points, but you should also write about one other thing, that how many points have we stated? So we just talked about storage devices platters and that they are divided into tracks, and then we have the disk which is being rotated or spun, and then it has a read write arm, that's like 4, and then we also wrote like how it makes use of electromagnet. But then you can also talk about one last point, as if like the magnetic field determines the binary value, or perhaps you're good to go till this point too. And if you want to write one other point, you can also talk about how the magnetic field defines the binary value, the binary value. Done. So, can I give computer name? Because yes, you can definitely do that. Atel, my brother, younger brother, he is currently in O1, and I'm making sure that he gives. Like I've told him that he should give his O level computer science exam in like the coming O1 May June 2026 series. So you can also go with that, and I would 100% recommend that, because if you are someone who might be opting for extra subjects, or even if you're not, the workload is going to be like for only 4 subjects, which is very much approachable. Now, coming to the question stated by Anaya, sir, I have a question. Why do we need both RAM and secondary storage of both stored data? Good question, by the way, Anaya. But the reasoning behind this is that your RAM is sort of a temporary memory. Say, RAM is a temporary memory. It is like a very fast but small memory. Fast but small memory. And it is fast because it is very close to the CPU. So you can say it's the person assistant of CPU, and it makes sure that whatever task is being executed, it's being done in the least amount of time. But then we see that the RAM only has maybe like a storage of 8 GB. But on my computer, I need to store like 120 GB worth of files. Now, where do I have to store all the other files? So for that reason, we have a SSD or a hard disk, which basically stores all the data. So all the data is first initially stored up here. Then let's say, for instance, I want to play a specific game. So whatever game file I have, so like I have a game file up here. This is my files for a specific game. So if I want to play this, what the computer does is it takes this file from the hard disk and it brings it into the RAM. So now it comes to the RAM, and now the RAM provides it to the CPU, and it's being executed. Once I've played the game and I, let's say, want to open up, let's say, YouTube. So what I can do is, let's say this is the file for YouTube. Now RAM is firstly going to remove this file from here. This is the reason why we call RAM as temporary memory. And now rather than having the green game file, now we're going to be storing the YouTube files in RAM. So whatever stuff that is being executed at this point, immediately that is stored within the RAM, but what the remaining data is stored in your hard disk. And why doesn't CPU and hard disk have a direct connection? Because getting or writing data between CPU and hard disk takes a lot of time. It's pretty much slow. So for that reason, we have introduced a faster sort of memory, which we call as RAM. See? So Atel is saying, I'm not giving original. Yeah, if you're not giving those 3 subjects, you should definitely go with this. I would 1000% recommend that, because you have literally no workload at this point. So you should clear up as many subjects as you want. And you do have enough time. Like even if you don't know a single element of CS, if you join our course starting from the 1st of December, inshallah, we're going to cover everything by mid-March, and then you would have ample amount of time to do enough past papers to ace that exam of yours too. So don't worry, say. Now, continuing, the third part says give two advantages of using a magnetic storage device rather than a solid state device. Now, usually the question comes the other way around, where it says that why should a person go with SSD rather than hard disk, for which we have ample amount of reasons, the one which we even stated in the previous one regarding the phone mobile device. But now we need to talk about why we should go with magnetic storage device rather than SSD. So the answer to this is that basically magnetic devices are usually cheaper per unit of data. So like if I have to get a 1000 GB hard disk, which is basically magnetic, it might cost me like around about 8000 PKR. But the same 1000 GB SSD might cost me like around 13 to 15,000. Now, this is just like general assumption, but there is such a big difference among the two. So the first point lies in like the first point, the benefit is that magnetic is cheaper per unit of data. Magnetic is cheaper per unit of data. And then the second benefit or advantage which you can state is that basically magnetic devices has more read write cycles, or you can say it's going to operate for a longer time, or we can also say it has more longevity. So usually there is a big problem with SSD devices that it has a specific limit. And that limit is something scientists are currently working on increasing, and all these companies coming up with latest SSDs have a better limit. But in comparison to the hard disk, if you are trying and you're ensuring that both hard disk and SSD are like dealt in a very proper way, the hard disk is always going to perform more for a longer time in comparison to SSD. This is one drawback of SSD. So the second advantage you can go with is related to how device magnetic storage device has a better, or you can say has more longevity, has more longevity. And you're done with this question too. By longevity, I basically mean that it can store data for a longer time. Same. So we have that's not the teacher, that's the teacher's assistant. So it's like the whole mechanism works under an academy. So she's going to reach out to you or TA, and you're going to be sending the amount to that person's number which the TA is going to be sharing you, and then she is going to add you to your group, say for the registered kiddos. Yeah. Yes, you can check out the registration form for all the details. No, she will, don't worry. She will reach out before the starting of the course. So even if you don't, and even if she doesn't reach out, you can reach out to me so I can ask her to message you guys. If you guys have any queries regarding the course registration process, if you have queries regarding how the course is going to be carried out, you guys can reach out to me. But if it's related to how to process the payment or any such thing, you can reach out to the TA's number, which is clearly mentioned on the form. And I also sent it in the group last night. So continuing with the questions, now we're going to be looking into this one question, which is saying that Priya studies music at school. Okay, good to know. She's buying a new computer to complete her schoolwork done at home. Okay. Now Priya has a choice between an internal hard disk drive and an internal SSD to store data. Internal and external has this difference that if I buy a separate SSD, we can take that, we can connect that, and it can operate like externally. But an internal one basically means that it's within your computer. Atel, these classes are not like random. We are just following some past paper session. It's like sort of a past paper topical session. So we're going to be continuing with chapter 4 tomorrow, inshallah. uh, but don't worry, we will be covering pseudocode in great depth or in the upcoming course. So inshallah, we're going to do everything in the right way, and don't worry, everything will be done. See? So now the first question says, give one similarity between hard disk and SSD. So you just need to list down one similarity. And the similarity is that they both are non-volatile, or they both are secondary storages, and they both have like maybe read-write abilities. So the best one is they both are non-volatile. They both are non-volatile, which basically means that both of them store data, not temporary but permanently. No worries, man. No worries. No worries. Continuing, the second part says give three differences between a hard disk and an SSD. So the first one is like HDD, or the hard disk has moving parts, but SSD does not. So we can write HDD. You should write the full form, has moving parts or moving parts, but SSD does not. Does not. 1 point. The second one go like maybe HDD uses magnetic storage, whereas SSD uses flash memory. So as HDD uses magnetic storage, whereas SSD uses flash memory. You would note one thing, that when the question stated explain three differences, I'm sort of mentioning it in a way. Point number one regarding hard disk, whereas point number two, which is dealing with SSD point. So you give the hard disk opinion and then you talk about the SSD's opinion, and that makes a perfect answer. Volatile does not mean storing data, right? No, 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 no. The word volatile basically means that it is something, it's related to chemistry, you can say, that a substance which can be easily evaporated is what we call as volatile. So anything which can be easily evaporated in this scenario means that anything which can lose data in easily. So when we say non-volatile, this means that it's not easy to lose data on its own unless you wanted to delete it, right? So when we say that a specific device is volatile, it means that it has the capability of losing data easily on its own. But it's not like the word volatile means that. And then the third one basically can go anything like you can say that a hard disk has higher power consumption than SSD. So you can say hard disk HDD has a higher power consumption, power consumption. Oh, spelling is being messed up. Let me rewrite. Has a higher power consumption than SSD. And you get 3 by 3 for this. Continuing with the B part, it says that Priya needs to transfer files between the school and her home computer. You need to identify one offline storage device she could use. So we can make use of the flash drive, USB flash drive. We can make use of SD cards. You can like literally mention any such thing which is valid up here. So I could go with like USB flash memory drive because that's something which is used the most commonly in our society. So we can go like USB flash memory drive. And also, just to clarify, we are usually told USB. We say USB, but in reality, USB is not this one, the device which transfers data. So, like the device which is like this, uh, we usually call this a USB, right? But this is not USB. This is basically a flash memory drive. Flash memory drive. The connecting part, this the one part connecting at the very front, this part, this is basically your USB. And the whole way, like when you study chapter number 2, you're going to find out that USB is basically a method of connecting the devices together. So it's universal serial bus. It's a bus. It's a way through which you can connect the two devices together. So we mistakenly always refer to the flash drive as a USB, whereas in reality, flash drive is not USB. Perhaps the connector at the very top is the actual USB. So for that reason, we always state USB flash memory drive. So it's recommended that you don't list down the flash memory drive, USB flash memory drive as USB only. You should write the full name, USB flash memory drive. At least for CS, it's very mandatory. Otherwise, there is a big chance that you lose marks. Continuing with question number 11, it says that a supermarket sells many products. Each product has a barcode, and then it makes use of an SSD. And now we need to explain how does an SSD work. It's worth 3 marks. So basically, the examiner expects us to write 3 points. Now, one other thing is that you can write bullet points. That's also valid, but usually it's recommended and it's preferred by the examiners that you should go with 3 full sentences, which links together. I personally, you can also do it like firstly, secondly, thirdly, or write it like in a paragraph or whatever suits you. But like up here, we can talk about, explain how does an SSD work. So like it makes use of flash storage that uses transistors to maybe like store data by flashing it onto the chips or devices or by controlling the flow of electrons using transistor or gates. So आप इसमें काफी points state कर सकते हैं. Firstly, we're going to write that it makes use of flash memory. Yeah, आपका एक point होगा. One sentence. The second point is going to be like it uses transistors and control gate. It uses transistors and control gates. Second, and now the third point, which basically is the actual working or the backbone of SSD, that it basically uses these gates and transistors to control the flow of electron. See, so it uses uh, it makes use of flash memory it makes use of flash memory, which uses transistor and control gate that allow memory. And thirdly, आप ये बोल दें it बल्कि नहीं इस तरह like let's list it out as separate points. आपका point number 1 ये हो गया. It makes use of flash memory. It uses transistors transistors and control gate, and these gates and transistors, and these gates and transistors are used to control the flow of electron. So your SSD works in a way where there is a flow of electron between your transistors, and that flow is basically maintained using your transistors and the control gate. So if it has an electron, it may be having the value of 1, but with the moment it loses the electron, the value switches to 0. So this process repeats on a flash memory NAND or NOR gate, and it continues again and again and again and again, and that allows it to store data. But now this is not the only point you can state. You can also make use of, like, the word, like, it makes use of flip-flops. It makes use of flip-flops. Then you can also maybe write other points, like maybe you can talk about how the electronics current reaches the control gate and then it flows through the floating gate to be stored. Or you can also write about how the data is stored by flashing data onto the chips or device. Or you can say that when data is stored in a transistor, it is converted from like 1 to 0 or 0 to 1. So you have multiple points which you can state, but because the examiner asked for 3 points, we're just going to be writing 3. In this case we wrote 4, and I would also recommend, because the question did not state that you should write 3 points, you should always write 4 points. Because what if one of the points I stated above is something which is not in the marking scheme, or maybe a vague point? So to avoid that possibility that one of the point is vague or something which we do not want, what we can do is we should go with 4 1, so that even if we have one vague points, we will be still awarded for 4 correct points. So agar ek galat bhi ho jata hai, we are still going to get 3 on 3. So this is one other tip which I usually give, but this is only going to be applied if the question does not specify how many points you need to state. But if the question clearly mentions that write 3 points, the first 3 are going to be counted. So even if you write 4, it's not something which can save you. Samajh gaye? So now continuing, the second part says one advantage of an SSD rather than HDD is that it has no moving parts, so it's more durable. Said one other advantage of the supermarket using SSD rather than HDD. Again, supermarket. So it's better to write something which is related to the application of supermarket. So supermarket mein rush bahut zyada hogi. There is a lot of crowd coming in and out. So we should go with something that allows us to solve that problem. So we can write like it has a faster read-write operation. Faster read-write operation. And you're going to get a perfect 1 for that. There we go, the last question. So the last question says that Pradeep stores his collection of films and his work files on his personal computer. Okay, Pradeep wants to save a copy of all onto a single storage device. Identify, justify an appropriate storage device to store the copies. So we just need to firstly tell what device should he go with and why. So you can go with like either a hard disk, or you can go with an SSD, or maybe memory stick or a flash drive or whatever. But let's say we go with hard disk. Why? Because firstly, it has a longer longevity, so the copies will be accessible for a long time. Then you can say that it is relatively cheaper per GB, so there is a large capacity required, so it may cost less. So we should go with these 4 points. So the first one will be hard disk. And now in the justification part, I'm going to be writing 1 point, and then I will be explaining as to why. And then I will go with the second point, and then I will explain why. So whenever the question says explain or justify, it's really important that you write a point, then you explain it, then continue with the second point, and then explain it. That's how you need to approach a question. So hard disk, so I'll be like, okay, firstly, hard disk has a better longevity, which allows the data to be stored, for a longer time. Secondly, um, the cost per GB is less for a hard disk in comparison to a SSD. So, because now you need to also talk about why. So, you see, it clearly states that we have to store the whole collection of his films, which definitely will be something of a very large file size. So, we're going to be stating that in comparison to SSD, it's going to be cheaper. Why? Because secondly, the cost per GB is less for hard disk in comparison. So, because the file size is humongous, the file size is going to be very large, is going to be very large. It will be cheaper to use. It will be cheaper to use hard disk in comparison to SSD. And so you see, you're going to get a perfect 4 on 4 for this in comparison to SSD. You're going to get a perfect 4 for this. So much again, that marks the end of this specific topical question part, or whatever you call this. But do you guys have any questions regarding it? Any questions, or should we just end the meeting? It's 9:59 though. Any questions? All right, seeing none, that will be the end of this class. See you guys tomorrow, inshallah. And we'll be starting off with chapter number 4 tomorrow. All right, take care. Bye bye. Allah Hafiz.